And before we convene, I'd like to remind everyone present that the board is a consumer protection agency charged with administering and enforcing the board's laws. Where protection of the public is inconsistent with other interests sought to be promoted, the protection of the public shall be paramount. The Board of Behavioral Sciences is holding this public meeting in person and via the WebEx platform. I'll announce when we are accepting public comment on the various issues. For each public comment period, we will first be accepting comments from the participants in the audience present in the room. Then the moderator will open the lines as appropriate so that the remote audience members can comment. Each commenter will have 2 minutes to comment. A couple of notes on today's agenda. We will not be discussing agenda item 18 today, and we'll be moving agenda item 15 to around after item 22. Moderator, would you please provide the audience instructions on how they may participate during the meeting at the appropriate time?
Absolutely. When the time comes for public comment, we're going to ask everyone to raise their hands. You can do so by tapping the hand button at the bottom of your screen. For our mobile device users, you have 3 different screens and only one of them has a hand button, so you may need to hit the ellipses button, that's the ... and cycle through the 3 different pages in order to find your hand. For our dial-in users, you'll need to dial *3 to raise your hand. As stated before, you'll be given 2 minutes to speak, and I'll give you a 15-second warning before your time expires. Madam Chair, back to you.
Great, thank you. Moving on to item 11, members during the roll call, please introduce yourself and let the public know whether you are a public or licensed member. Christina, will you call the roll?
Yes, good morning. Dr. Nicholas Boyd,
Good morning, President LPCC member.
Eleanor Uribe,
Present, LCSW member.
Dr. Annette Walker,
Good morning, present, public board member, pronouns she, her.
Susan Friedman,
Good morning, Susan Friedman, present, public member.
Wendy Strack,
Present public member.
Justin Huft,
Present, MFT, he, him.
Kelly Ranasinghe,
Present public member.
Abigail Ortega,
Present LCSW member.
Lourdes Bailey.
Present, public member.
For the record, Christopher Jones and John Sovek are absent. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Board staff, would you like to introduce yourselves?
You go ahead.
Roseanne Helms, Legislative Manager for the board.
Steve Sodergren, Executive Officer for the board.
Sorry, Sabina Knight, Legal Counsel for the board.
Good morning, Marlon McManus, Assistant Executive Officer for the board.
Christy Berger, Regulatory Manager for the board.
Thank you. Now is the time for the public to introduce themselves if they would like, and this is voluntary. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to introduce themselves?
Good morning, Shanti Ezrin with the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists.
Good morning, Ben Caldwell, MFT.
Moderator, is there anyone on WebEx that would like to introduce themselves?
There is indeed. First, we're going to hear from Dr. Jasmine Smith. Hold on just a moment. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Jasmine Smith. I'm with the NASW California chapter. Thank you.
Next, we're going to hear from GV Ayers. Hold on just a moment. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone. All right. GV Ayers, you have muted yourself twice. If you do not wish to speak, please lower your hand. Next, we're going to hear from Kathy Atkins. Hold on just a moment.
Kathy Atkins with the California Association of Family Therapists.
Kathy, say that again, please. We're going to send you another request to unmute your microphone.
Good morning. This is Kathy Atkins with CAF. Thanks for having me.
And those are all of our requests for public comment at the moment.
Great, thank you. Just a note for scheduling purposes, we're going to be aiming for a lunch break around 12:30 today. This will be depending on where we are with the meeting items. Moving on to item 13, the board chair report. Excuse me, the board member attendance report shows the attendance of board members for board meetings and committee meetings during the last fiscal year. Please let staff know if there are any errors. And as a reminder, attendance at board and committee meetings is important. For the future board meeting calendar, you'll see in the materials a list of all upcoming board meetings. If you have any conflicts, please let Christina know so that we can be sure we'll have quorum at the meetings. And then lastly, the best part, we have some staff recognitions today, and we'd like to recognize them for their years of service to the state of California. First, we have Brandy Somas, who has served 5 years and is currently part of the board's examination unit. Priscilla Sazo has served for 5 years and is currently part of the board's consumer complaint unit. Veronica Rosas has served for 5 years and is currently a part of the board's LMFT licensing unit. And we'd also like to note that our very own Marlon McManus has just passed his 25 years of service. So thank you to all of the BBS staff for all you do and for your terms of all of your long terms of service to the board. Next, item 14, we have a Department of Consumer Affairs update.
Good morning. My name is Karina Moreno of the California Department of Consumer Affairs. Thank you for the opportunity to join you today. On behalf of the department, I'd like to thank all members who serve to protect the public. First is the DEI update. DCA's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Steering Committee met last month, and we are excited to announce its newly elected leadership. Reggie Varghese, Medical Board of California's Executive Director, will serve as chair, and Marlon McManus, the Board of Behavioral Sciences Assistant Executive Officer, will serve as vice chair. With Reggie and Marlon's years of experience and sincere commitment, we greatly look forward to accomplishing many DEI initiatives under their leadership. New unconscious bias training for board members. I'm also excited to share that DCA is updating its current Unveiling Unconscious Bias training to specifically focus on board members, your critical roles, and how unconscious bias can affect your decision-making authority. The training will be self-paced and available in DCA's online learning management system, LMS. We anticipate launching this new training in early 2025, and board members will be required to take it annually. As a reminder, DCA offers over 20 online DEI training courses in its learning management system. While these courses are not mandatory, board members and board leaders are strongly encouraged to take these trainings, as you are instrumental in leading department-wide change. Military Licensing Resources Webinar. To support and maximize outreach to our military community, DCA is hosting a second live webinar on November 21st, 2024, to share information about military licensing resources. During the webinar, attendees will learn about licensing resources available to members of the military and their spouses or domestic partners. The webinar will also feature a demonstration of DCA's Federal Professional License Portal and state registration process, which was launched last fall, as well as a Q&A session. Webinar details and information will be available at www.dca.ca.gov/military. New Business and Travel Expense Reimbursement Program. The state's Department of Human Resources, also known as CalHR, recently released an updated travel policy to align with federal policies outlined by the U.S. General Services Administration. Effective October 1st, 2024, DCA will use the federal standard meals and incidental expense rates for in-state and out-of-state travel. DCA will also use the federal standard and non-standard reimbursement lodging rates. Information on these changes was shared with the board leaders at the end of September. Board members are encouraged to become familiar with the new travel expense reimbursement program and rates. Please contact Board and Bureau Relations with any questions regarding these changes. Season of Giving. We're officially in the season of giving, and DCA is honored to join in the annual charitable campaigns launching this month. DCA's annual turkey drive and the state's Our Promise campaign. DCA held its third annual turkey drive on November 13th, 2024, with donations benefiting Joey's Food Locker, a local food bank located near DCA's headquarters in Sacramento. The items collected during this event are part of a larger state employees food drive that takes place this time of year as well. Later in the month, DCA will announce collection box locations. Our Promise campaign launch, State Employees Giving at Work campaign. Every year through the Our Promise California State Employees Charitable Campaign, state employees, including board members, have the opportunity to support the nonprofit causes they are passionate about through payroll giving or one-time donations. These contributions have a positive impact on our communities and is another way for DCA to show it cares for California. This year's campaign is led by Monica Vargas, Deputy Director of Communications, and Karen Navarro, Assistant Deputy Director of Communications. DCA's campaign officially launches on November 18th and runs through December 31st. In the meantime, please contact Board and Bureau Relations with any questions or if you would like information on how you can give. Again, thank you for the opportunity to join you today. I'm happy to answer any questions from the board.
Thank you so much for the report. Do we have any questions from board members? Seeing none. Thank you so much for being here with us this morning.
Thank you.
And I think for item 16, we don't have our presenters yet.
Not yet.
Okay. So while we wait for that, we will go to item 17 and then we'll come back to 16.
And 17 was the, that's the sunset report.
Yeah, so we're going to skip item 16 and we'll come back to it when our presenters get here. So moving on to item 17, discussion and possible recommendation for the board's sunset report. Steve, I think this is you.
Yes, this is me. This is the sunset report draft that we had. We looked at this the last meeting, and this is the most current version of that. Hopefully you had a chance to look. And there still needs to be some work. There's some data points that I have to actually add in there. And we're really continuing to, it's one of those things where I don't want to let go until it's kind of, we want to make sure it's perfect. So what you can see, basically going over the sunset report again, this is a report that we will present to the legislature in around, we have to actually get it in January 16th is when we have to hand this report in. And what this report is used for is the staffers will look at that, see what we've done over the last 5 years, look at any concerns that they may have, and then they will draft a report for review for their senators' assemblies to look at, and they come back with questions for us to answer. So what really is the sunset report is really showing all the work we've done over the last 5 years. And then additionally, last time we kind of pointed out our additional items that we might be looking at in the future and what we have concerns with or things that we want to kind of tackle in the next few years. And those are the new issues that we have put in there. My goal is not, I think what I'm asking for today is to get approval to, from the board members to get approval on the sunset report as it stands right now. And then we're going to do a couple more edits and such, and then allow the board chair to make the final, stamp of approval to send that over to the legislature. I think right now, as it stands, there won't be any major changes to the report itself, just some cleanup, maybe some additional language to explain some of the new issues a little bit better, and then also the data. So it's really there. If you have any input right now, I would appreciate it, and go from there.
Oh, Justin.
Steve, can you help me understand a little what needs to be in this report? Because a lot of this makes sense, describing what legislation has gone through, how many licenses have gone through, but then there's a dozen pages about Robert's Rules of Order, another dozen pages about instructions on how to vote for things. These are things that I would imagine the legislature already knows or is not unique to us. So help me understand what is included in this packet and why.
I think what part of the packet is we do have to actually submit. They want to see the rules that we have for the board procedure manual. So that is kind of just an attachment. So in case they just want to review that, what we're responding to, everything that's in the main content of it without the attachments are questions. And you see, I actually have the questions listed out there. Those are what we have to kind of respond to. So you're right. I mean, they should know all about the Robert's Rules of Orders. I think it's just there so they can have an idea of how we kind of operate. So does that make sense?
It does. Thank you. I have one more question. Somewhere on page 436, we have attachment A, the telehealth survey. I think that's the only, am I correct that that's the only survey the BBS has done since the last Sunset Review?
No, we've done quite a few surveys in there. I think within the report, we're going to have, I think it was the telehealth survey, the online therapy company survey. I'm also going to put in there as attachment, it should be in there, hopefully it is the workforce development survey that we just did recently.
Yes,
So there's quite a few.
Okay, thank you.
I think Nick and then,
Steve, I just had a question. So when this gets submitted to the legislature, they look at it, and then I'm assuming they respond back in a written report. Is that usually the process? So what is maybe you can just walk us through the process after this is submitted?
So after, I'm sorry there. Like I said, so after we submit that, then they will look the report over, and then we'll actually come up with questions for us to kind of respond to based upon that report. Or maybe there's additional items that they want to know about. So January 16th, we hand that in. I'm not sure the timing. Soon after that, they'll come back with questions for us, and then we will draft a response to those. And then after that, the next point and the next part is actually going in front of the legislature to, answer any questions they may have and kind of explain what we've done over the last 5 years.
So I guess last question and somewhat related to that. One of the things that stood out to me, and this is just maybe a point that I was drawn to, was on page 43, it talked about the number of audits that have completed since March 12th of 2024. Because there was a period of time where there was a pause, right, during COVID, where that stuff wasn't taking place. There was 143 audits conducted out of 129,000 applicants. That represents less than 0.1% of all of our license holders. And yet last board meeting, we just said we were going to give credit now for CEUs and supervision. And I pointed this out then, and I'm pointing it out again now, that there's a huge issue with this, that if our responsibility is to ensure that our license holders are keeping up with their ethical and legal responsibility to be competent clinicians, I would say that that's a pretty big discrepant issue in how we're passing policy versus how we're enforcing our requirements. So I just wanted to point that out because I think we really need to think about how we're doing. I understand the burden administratively, but I also think that we have a really important responsibility to make sure that our license holders are doing what they're supposed to be doing.
And I mean, I agree with you too. And like you say, administratively, we do have one person assigned to that. But that's not to say there's other ways we can, audits. There's definitely, we can do better on that. So, yeah. Abigail?
I noticed that there's a population increase of 22% in the licensing, right? Licensing population. So I thought that was really interesting because there's always a lot of conversation, right? It sounds like we don't have enough, but the numbers have actually increased. And I would love to see how that ties into like the workforce development committee, which is one of the focuses on increasing the mental health, right, workforce in California, and how the work of the committee ties in to maybe that 22% increase. Like, I'm not seeing how that all comes together. And also, like a breakdown of like per like we saw in the ASWB event that we went to, how they broke down like per population, how many therapists are there per like 100,000 people, right, in the state. And like just visualizing, like when we say there's a shortage, like what do we actually mean and what are we comparing it to? We can compare it to other states, so that it's clear. And then also the breakdown of where are the people that are graduating. Is it that there's a shortage only in the nonprofits? Is there a shortage in private practice? So that we can like direct our energy inside of the Workforce Development Committee towards maybe like, oh, there are this amount of therapists, but they're not excited about going into the nonprofit work. And having conversations from seeing the numbers versus like this generalized statement. Mhm.
No, that makes sense. And I think, we'll have HK in here today talking about something completely different, but they're a resource for us to really partner with to get more of that data. And I know that they're researching that too. So really strengthening that relationship and utilizing their resources in the next years. I think we can probably kind of expand on what we're talking about at the Workforce Committee and get those data. So thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Steve. Just a couple of maybe clarifications here, just so that I understand the process and where we are. So given what you said, that your final draft, or ours is yours, final draft is due on January 16th, is that what you said?
Correct.
And so we're here in this moment to approve what you have, all that so far,
Correct.
right? Because again, you're working on being perfect. You want everything in, dot the I, cross the T. Okay, with that said, we won't have an opportunity to see what you're submitting, or will we?
Well, that's where it's kind of asking you, either we move forward with saying, giving Chris the option of approving the final draft, or we would have to convene again for a special meeting to actually go over that. And if I was putting that motion forward, knowing that, and hopefully I can kind of, again, your trust in that, is that there's really not going to be any sort of substantial changes to what you see here. It's going to be cleanup language, or maybe like expanding on explaining maybe the process times and such. So I'm not going to, especially with the new issues, that's where new issues, there's a couple, I think I want to kind of add more language to that so they have an understanding, but I'm not going to add any more new issues in. So really no substantial changes from here. If we want to review this again and approve it as a board, we will have to meet again sometime in December to do that. Actually, probably sooner than that, because I have to work with, getting it printed out. So
Yeah, but like you said, nothing.
Can't hear you.
Nothing substantive. No, nothing additionally new is going to be really added between now and then. It would be cleanup. You would, authorize your executive officer, your president, to make those changes, any non-substantive changes like that, technical changes, and then But what you see here is pretty complete unless they have to beef up any sections.
Sure. And I want to trust the process. I'm just very transparent in the work that we do publicly and externally and internally. So that's my point that I'm making. But I do trust you and I trust the process. So I don't, hopefully we won't have to do that. Is there a work around that where you could at least send your final draft to the board?
Yeah, the report will be published.
So the one for 116, what you're sending in?
I mean, actually, this is a legal question.
She's saying, yeah.
Sending it out as a draft, I mean, to the board members to look over and submit. No, that would still be, that wouldn't be.
You could send it once it's.
Once it's published, yeah, we can send it out, so.
Okay, I'm not done, Susan. Okay. Well, it won't be published until it's final, which would be in June, right?
Oh, January.
Okay.
January.
Okay.
That's when we have to submit it in January 16th. So we'd have to, I mean, the final would have to be done, that week or before at
Okay.
least, so.
Well, what you're submitting is a draft and they're going to provide feedback to you, but what?
Oh, what I'm presenting today, is basically, this is, almost the final report. Just have to do cleanup. And then, Chris will be able to look that over and see if he has any concerns with what's presented. And there's not going to be substantial changes to the form that you're seeing right now.
Okay.
And I definitely take that into consideration and I took that into consideration asking for this motion because I don't want to, you read the final report and you're like, wait a minute, that wasn't in there before. I mean, so we want to make sure that.
Okay, I appreciate that. Just switching gears here, out of curiosity, I'm wondering what kind of feedback was provided the last time you provided the sunset? And if there were, and they made recommendations and changes, are those in this report?
Those are actually addressed in the past concerns. And those are items that we have been working on. So you can see those too, actually, the ones that they have actually. And honestly, too, if you can actually see all the past, it's on the website. I can actually send that out to you too. They have on their website, the Senate's website, all the past, sunset reviews and such. And you can kind of get an idea of what happens and what kind of reports they send to us and how they go through that.
That's good to know. I'm almost done, Susan. That's good to know. And that it's also public information. And so for everyone to see and that we're on top of it and have addressed those issues. Thank you so much, Steve.
Yeah, and since we did address, I think, all the issues they had last time. So it was good. So.
Great. Okay, well, thank you for your work.
I'm just curious, who exactly reads this? Sorry. Who exactly reads this?
So it's hopefully everybody reads it. I mean, that's what I'm hoping. Really, the Senate Business and Professions Committee. It's a joint committee of Assembly and Senate. They will have staffers review that, make notes, and I definitely talk to their leaders about it, and then they will present that to us. So, and then that's it gets reviewed before the hearings. So, hopefully all the Assembly members and senators will review that too. So.
Kelly?
I would move that we direct staff to make any discussed non-substantive changes, obtain final approval to submit from the board chair.
Do we
I'll
have a
second that.
Dr. Walker?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Any comments or questions from our in-person audience?
Good morning, Ben Caldwell, MFT. I want you to hear this as sort of a process question more than anything else. You have to forgive me, I have not read every page of the report. So this may be there and I might have just missed it, but is there anything here or should there be anything here? That's kind of the process question about the problems with clinical exams. I know that like the board doesn't control the ASWB exam, for example, but that has been such an area of discussion and controversy kind of in the profession with other states crafting laws with alternative pathways to licensure. Is that something that appropriately would go into this document for legislative review, or is that something that would rationally stay outside of it?
It could. I know that it's something that we will continue to look at. So we did not bring it up in the new issues per se. I think there is in somewhere in part of it, there is a segment of talking about exams and looking at that. But I mean, it could be appropriate if the board would want to put that as a new issue, is to kind of put that in as a new issue, looking at that. I mean, we could do that.
Then my only other note was just, and I'm sure you touched this anyway in review, but I think it's on like page 18 of the PDF. You talked about the board loaning the general fund $10. I think that meant 10 million.
That's what I was hoping. It was 10. You know, it's funny. It was actually somebody else was like texting me that it's like $10. That's not. So that's what I'm talking about. Non-substantial, but actually, yeah, Ben does bring up a good point, and maybe we want to open that for discussion for a new item. Would you want me to put that as an issue for the next few years, looking at you know, what we've been kind of the conversation about the disparity in exam pass rates and such?
I think you're seeing a lot of nodding heads here.
Okay.
So do we want to do the makers? Kelly, do you want to revise your motion to include that as a new issue?
How about I withdraw my motion so someone can make a new one?
You can say, I mean, direct staff to add a new item concerning examinations and do you have something? Like examine?
Maybe addressing disparities in exam outcomes.
Yeah, there we go. So adding a new item and addressing the disparities in the exam outcomes. And ask the staff to add that and proceed on with having the chairperson to approve the final draft.
Okay, let me see if I can get all the wording correctly. All right, I would move that we direct staff to make any discussed changes to include addressing the disparities in national exams and obtain final approval to submit from the board chair. Did I catch everything? And any non-substantive changes.
Great.
And I agree with that.
Your second?
Motion,
All right.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's my second.
We'll
Second.
continue on with public comment in the room here on the revised motion.
I'm gonna have to take the mic off because I'm too tall. Good morning. My name is Shanti Ezrin with CAMP. Thank you for all of the work that has gone into the Sunset Review report. Since the last time we reviewed, we really appreciate seeing some new additions to some of the new issues list, including issue number 1, the cleanup legislation to include deleting the sunset date for the allowance of supervision via video conferencing and extending the temporary practice allowance sunset date, and then also statutory amendments for the AMFT RB national exam. I know there's more non-substantive work to get this polished up and ready for the legislature, so I'll note a couple formatting items on some of the different pages of the report here. So when looking at the new issue section, if you take a look at issues 6 through 8, it looks like a couple of the issue titles seem to be cut off. And then on page 66 of the report, it actually skips over one of the issue titles, and that is on the AMFT RB national exam. So in actuality, I think right now the report has 11 issues listed, but with the AMFT RB national exam one kind of there, but not really there, that would make it 12 issues and not 11. So those are a couple of the formatting things that I wanted to highlight. And then just lastly, I'd like to continue to encourage staff and the board to utilize CAMP and other associations for data mining efforts and other ways that we can help engage on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you for that's embarrassing, but thanks for the formatting.
Well, in a 590-page document, you're allowed a couple.
Okay.
Do we have any other comments in the room? All right, moderator, do we have any remote participants wishing to comment?
At least one. We're going to start with Dr. Jasmine Smith. Oh, I forgot my spiel. Hold on. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users, dial *3 to raise a hand. And for our mobile device users, you may need to hit the ellipses button. That's the ... in order to find your hand. We're going to start with Dr. Jasmine Smith. Hold on just a moment. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
Hi, thank you so much. And again, thank you for all the work that you have been doing with us. I just wanted to add a comment to, I believe it was Ben Caldwell about the ASWB, and just wondering if there will be any introduction about the social work licensure compact, and any efforts regarding those processes for individuals who are looking for alternative ways of maintaining or extending their license.
Yes, we definitely are addressing one of our new issues is the compacts. We'll have to look at those. And yeah, so that is in the report. So hopefully that answers the question.
Dr. Jasmine Smith.
Sorry, it took a minute for me to unmute. Yes, I unfortunately wasn't able to view it, so maybe it's just somewhere in the
Oh, that's fine.
pages, but thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to hear from GV Ayers. Hold on just a moment. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
Good morning. This is G.V. Ayers with representing the California Association for Licensed Professional Clinical Counselors. Regarding the Sunset Review Report, you've done a tremendous job. These are amazing tasks that you fulfill on that. Just as footnote, I have analyzed, working at the legislature, I analyzed numerous Sunset reports, and then working as a bureau chief in the Department of Consumer Affairs, I wrote one of these reports, so I can understand some of it from both sides. You have done well, as you always do. But I would like to comment on issue number 4 on page 65 regarding adding an LPCC member to the board. LPCC or CalPIC is very much in favor of this and supports this this idea. This was in the bill in 2009, but the late amendments, if I'm not mistaken, I think the very latest, the last amendment of the bill narrowed it from 2 to 1. And so this restores it back to what Senator Weiland and Senator Steinberg were pointing at in the first place there. So we believe that because of the growth, 30% growth in as pointed out in the issue there, that this is relevant as well. Also, interstate compacts, we are continuing that discussion with the legislature. This is issue 9. And then I'll show the issues that were pointed out previously on number 1, video conference and temporary practice allowance. We support that. Thank you.
Thank you. And that was our last request for public comment from WebEx.
And just to note, GV was saying that actually we were talking about the past issues. This was a past issue that was brought up that we still have not kind of moved forward on. So we put that as another future issue. So.
And then just for the commenter, the first commenter online, the compacts are referenced on page 66 of the report. That helps you find it. Seeing no other comments, and we have a motion. Any other board member? Any follow-up from board members? Okay. Christina, you were in the back yesterday, and now you're. I keep looking for you back there. Sorry. Will you please take the vote?
Dr. Nick Boyd,
Yes.
Eleanor Uribe,
Yes.
Dr. Annette Walker,
Yes.
Susan Friedman,
Yes.
Wendy Strack,
Yes.
Justin Huft,
Yes.
Kelly Ronasinghe,
Yes.
Abigail Ortega,
Yes.
Loris Bailey,
Yes.
motion carries.
Thank you. And I think we have our presenters for item 16, Wellness Coach Certification Program. Steve, would you introduce the presentation?
Yes, hi. So we have Ann Powell and Christian Jones. They are from the California Department of Healthcare Access and Information, and they will be speaking to us today about the Wellness Coach Certification Program. And I think it's something that I wanted board members to be a little bit educated about. We're talking about workforce development, and I think this is one of the key components that's being worked on to help the workforce in California. So it's a certification program. I kind of see it as almost like a step up to possibly encouraging people to actual licensure is where I'm looking at it. And
You have the slides.
I think we do have the slides. And so,
Hi.
yeah, and we have a great presentation. So hopefully you'll
Thank you
get
very
something
much
out of it.
for this opportunity. We're very honored to be able to come before the board and talk about this brand new profession, and in particular, how it fits in the pipeline with licensed positions, because that's a really important feature of the program we'll get to in the discussion.
Yeah.
But the first thing I want to do is just tell you briefly.
Oh, sorry.
Item 16. Technology.
Is that good? I'm sorry, hold on just a second here, because it's only going to be up there. Do we have the slide deck?
There we go. So next
Oh, there we
slide.
go.
Perfect. So HCI, which is Department of Healthcare Access and Information, exists to ensure expansion of equitable access to quality, affordable healthcare for all of Californians through our facilities, through actionable information, and a health workforce. And the focus is workforce today. Next slide. So our mission at the department is a healthier California. We have values that drive, next slide, our work, service, equity, innovation, and professionalism. And then on slide 5, you will see these are the basic programs that are operated out of our department. We do seismic safety for facilities. You're probably most familiar with that work. We finance through a loan insurance program, healthcare facilities, workforce, the division that I'm in and Christian is in. We do analysis, collect and analyze data. And we have a new activity around healthcare affordability, which is probably best known for recent regulations capping growth in healthcare expenses at 3% annually going forward. So next slide. I'm going to be brief because I want to get to the work that we're here today to talk about. We have 3 objectives in our health workforce programming: reaching medically underserved areas, serving Medi-Cal members, and making sure that the workforce is representative through race and language diversity. Next slide. And then you can move beyond that. Keep going. So I want to talk today about really the rationale for the certified wellness coach, because I think it will paint a picture of how we see this fitting into the larger ecosystem of behavioral health practice. So we know from the data that there are severe rates of depression, hopelessness, and suicide among children and adolescents. We have a severe shortage of behavioral health professionals. There is a desire in this administration to transform the delivery system to place an emphasis on upstream solutions. And the wellness coach is designed to attend to preclinical needs of children and youth to reduce the onset of behavioral health conditions. Next slide. I've mentioned something about already a bit about the crisis, and we recently did an extensive literature review to understand the dimensions of the crisis in California for our children and youth. And nationally, we know that there's a crisis. The Surgeon General has spoken to it in particular. I won't go through these rates, you can read them, but as you can see, we're looking on average at about a 40% a rate of onset of some form of behavioral health condition as among children and youth. Next slide. So the purpose of the wellness coach is to expand that larger delivery system to include preclinical work by engaging with children directly through age 25. This is part of the governor's Children and Youth Behavioral Health Initiative, which focuses on children and youth through age 25. Again, diversity is a very critical aspect of the work that we're doing and trying to reach professionals or would-be professionals to better align with the population. And that, again, that desirable outcome of being a stepping stone to more advanced roles. Next slide. So I will just, by way of this slide, I hope what it demonstrates is that for 3 years, we've been working at developing this role. It's been a very intentional process that's involved extensive community input from all forms of stakeholders, clinicians, schools, community, parents, and youth. And through that extensive process, we've landed on the design we have now. Next slide, and then you can forward to that beyond. So the wellness, next slide. So the wellness coach is 2 levels based on your degree. There's the associate level, which is a wellness coach 1, and a bachelor level that's a certified wellness coach 2. You can see here there are different pathways to getting there. There's the education pathway and the workforce pathway. And our goal is that these individuals can assist school personnel to help serve youth that providing prevention services upfront to educate youth and children about conditions like, I'll say, bullying or sleep disorder, that if they're experiencing something, that to normalize and destigmatize their stress and give them a resource to come and talk to before they actually present needing clinical care, and for the coach to refer when they suspect a need for further services to clinicians. My colleague will go into more detail about that. I want to stress in the next slide, next slide. I know it's hard with a document like this. So what this lays out for you is where the sort of the what I call the ecosystem of providers. So you've got your certified personnel, your community health worker, peer support, which are high school level. You've got your 2 wellness coach 1 and 2, and social workers, and then masters and licensure. And we see this as as I mentioned earlier, a pipeline into the masters and licensure opportunities. Next slide. So a lot of people say, what's the difference between a wellness coach and these other paraprofessionals? And in addition to requiring college education, the peer support is really recovery-oriented, culturally appropriate services for people with chronic mental health conditions. That's traditional place where this work is done. And then the community health worker is about linking health and social services to the family or youth. And then we get into the bachelor level social worker, which is could be a generalist position, but we view the certified wellness coach as parallel to the social worker if it's a wellness coach 2. If it's a wellness coach 1, it would fall after the community health worker, which the earlier map laid out. Next slide. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Christian, and we're both here to answer any questions.
Hello, I'm Christian Jones, a behavioral health analyst at HCI, and I'm going to run through the rest of the deck and then take questions. So the wellness coach has 6 core services. I'm going to run through them in detailed in follow-up slides, but they're wellness promotion and education, screening. I want to note that's assisting with screening and only screening that's where a license is not required for the screening. Care coordination and extension, providing individualized support and group level support, and also crisis referral. And to do these things, a certified wellness coach needs these 4 additional competencies. They need cultural responsiveness and humility, and the ability to mitigate implicit bias, a sense of professionalism, ethics, and awareness of legal mandates as it relates to healthcare, good communication across different kinds of behavioral health roles, working in settings that are complicated, such as foster care homes, schools, homeless shelters, and a wide variety of settings that just require different sorts of skills to operate in. I'm gonna, next slide. Okay, thank you. So on this slide, we just have, this is more informational for you guys of just an example of how supervision can work for these roles. A certified wellness coach requires supervision. We do not envision circumstances in which this role would operate without supervision. And this provides an example of either individual or small group styles of supervision that can be conducted by a licensed clinician or by a PPS provider if the setting in which the services are being delivered is a school setting. Next slide. And here, this is our walkthrough of the services in detail. So wellness promotion and education is delivering group and classroom programming that's structured curriculum. This is not curriculum that the wellness coach themselves has designed. This is designed for them, and then they are the deliverer of that curriculum. For our wellness coach 1, this can be just building positive relationships, bullying prevention programs, nutrition and exercise programs, educating youth about mental health literacy, or educating them about life skills. For our bachelor's level wellness coach 2, there's more advanced options for the structured curricula, so behavior activation, promoting positive emotions and well-being, supporting and practicing overcoming maladaptive thinking, teaching youth about distraction strategies and emotional regulation. Second core service is screening. So this is supporting other behavioral health providers in screening and then identifying and referring youth that are in need of a screening or that show, with the help of a licensed clinician, identifying and referring youth that have potentially negative results as a result of a screening, and coordinating and assisting universal screenings that are required in schools. Third service is care coordination and extension. So this is connecting individuals with behavioral health resources in the school setting or in the community setting, such as food or housing programs, getting them signed up for Medicaid. It's also facilitating communication with other behavioral health professionals. This is somewhat like the community health worker role, but not as specialized and not as culturally oriented, but really connecting them with the license provider that they're working with or connecting them with other community resources. And this is also as a part of a care plan that can be established by a licensed clinician. So a licensed clinician can set a care plan and the certified wellness coach can implement the care plan and then have checkups with the licensed clinician on a regular basis to establish how that care plan is going, and then providing additional support at times and in settings when a licensed clinician would be unavailable and there's a sort of immediate need. So next slide. So the method for delivering support is obviously in the individual and the group setting. So we envision a wellness coach 1 to provide these brief 5 to 15-minute checkups or 30-minute scheduled meetings, and they deliver individual support for wellness education, goal setting, and life skills. And then our bachelor's level wellness coach 2 is going to expand that into behavior activation, maladaptive thinking, distraction strategies, and emotional strategies. And again, we make the distinction between our associate's level and our bachelor's level as to the kinds of things that they can engage in when providing support. And then we make those same distinctions at the group level. So this is small group programming on the same set of skills I just listed, distinguished again for the associate level and bachelor's level coach. And then the final core service is, of course, crisis referral. Anybody working in a behavioral health setting needs to know when something is outside of their scope and they are dealing with a situation that they are not qualified to deal with, and they need to know, who do I walk this child to? What do I do in the meantime, in between the space between walking this person to a more qualified provider, and engaging in warm handoffs and providing also follow-on support to that person in crisis after they have spoken with a licensed clinician or somebody more qualified. Next slide, please. And I think it's 2 slides ahead. Thank you. So as a part of this work, we're partnering with community colleges and CSUs to create what we call HCI designated training programs, education programs that we designate for basically easy access to the certification. The idea being, if somebody attends one of these programs, we know that they have all of the competencies that we think matter to becoming a certified wellness coach. And in these 2 slides, we list that program structure that we think is important for a certified wellness coach 1, and then the follow-on slide, a certified wellness coach 2. And I won't go into the details, but definitely here if you have questions. Next slide. And also next slide again. And here we have the certification requirements again. So we have 2 pathways. We have an education pathway and a workforce pathway. So here we have the education pathway. For Certified Wellness Coach 1, you need an associate's degree in social work, human services, or addiction studies, and 150 hours of field experience minimum. For a Wellness Coach 2, you need a bachelor's degree in those same fields and a minimum field experience requirement of 300 hours. Next slide. Here we have the workforce pathway. In the workforce pathway, this is designed for people that were already providing the work in the school setting. In our stakeholder engagement process, we found that there were a lot of roles that were in schools that were an associate's level or a bachelor's level mental health position that provided something like the scope of services that we would envision for the wellness coaches. And we made this pathway to encapsulate that staff that were currently working. We expanded the majors accepted to include child development and early intervention, psychology, and sociology, but also expanded the field experience requirements to 1,000 hours minimum for a Wellness Coach 1 and 2,000 hours minimum for Wellness Coach 2. Next slide. And here, this is just an informational slide for you all. This is the process by which a wellness coach would get certified. I'm not going to run through that in detail, but definitely here if you have questions. Next slide. So here's a really helpful slide. Obviously, when you're creating a new certification in the mental health space, you're going to need to distinguish between activities that are in scope for this certified role and things that are outside of scope. So just running through the out of scope, we do not think that a wellness coach should ever be assessing, diagnosing, or providing clinical intervention or treatment. We don't think they should be providing academic advising services or designing specialized curricula to deliver behavioral health support. They're not like only administrative workers. So this is a behavioral health role in the school settings. A lot of these roles currently engaged in administrative activities that are sort of like non-behavioral health related. So we distinguish that distinction. And we also don't think that they need to be providing medical referrals. We don't think that's within scope. And they do not administer or coordinate IEPs. Next slide. Here we just have an illustrative list of all of the locations that we think a wellness coach could be beneficial. Right now, most of the certified wellness coaches that we have are working inside of the school setting because that has been the targeted approach that we've taken with our grants. And it's also where insurance companies will be reimbursing for wellness coach services in the future. But we believe that anywhere where youth are, that a wellness coach can be providing services in that space. So that's in schools, in community-based organizations, health centers, juvenile justice, homeless service locations, and DHCS actually provides coaching services through telehealth through Soluna and Bright Life. If I don't know if they've ever come and talking about that, but so there's telehealth options, and just across multiple locations, we believe that this role can be of service. Next slide. So here we have a example of a school setting and how supervision can look within that space. In the school setting, a PPSC or a licensed behavioral health provider can provide supervision. And we walk through just how that supervision might look in the school setting. Again, just illustrative though. Next slide. And finally, this is a community setting. In a community setting, we only recommend that licensed providers are the ones that are supervising wellness coaches. And again, we just illustrate how that supervision might work. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present, and we're here for your questions.
Thank you so much. Susan, you have a question.
I'm very curious about this. First of all, I assume that this is the governor's answer to the Surgeon General's report of last year, that there is a mental health crisis among children in America.
So this came in 2021 as part of the Children and Youth Behavioral Health Initiative and the California Health and Human Services Agency, at the direction of the governor, developed that initiative, and in it said, what can we do to get in front of the problem? So it was to address that aspect or that question in the larger.
Okay, I understand that.
Okay.
I represent the public and I come from Los Angeles. Every foster child in Los Angeles needs mental health care.
Yes.
We don't have the people to do this.
That's right.
And we also discovered that in the schools, kids only want to talk to another kid. They don't want to talk to a wellness coach. They want to talk to another kid. And most schools in Los Angeles have developed cadres of kids who are available to all the other kids. But for very serious cases, and we do know that suicide is a very, very, very big issue right now. For those serious cases, I don't know how they deal with it, to be quite honest with you. How many wellness coaches do you have out there now, or are we just beginning to get them?
We literally started certification in February of this year. We already are approaching 600. Our goal is that we'll have about 2,500 by the end of next calendar year. And let me just step back and say that a couple things. One is, in order to kind of create the space for a wellness coach in the school system, we handed out large grants to 64 organizations of $125 million for them to hire wellness coaches and use this model to gain experience and inform the process. I don't want to say it's iterative, because we've spent a lot of time working with the communities to design it as it is right now. But an example is, we're learning about what college degrees are appropriate for this position as we go. So for example, as you saw, we have social work, addiction studies, and human services, because those have field placements associated with them as part of the education. So they get an opportunity during their education to have exposure in working with children. So I don't have an answer for you. I will just tell you, I'm a former foster youth. I am very passionate about the concern you raise. There are efforts by the Department of Health Services as part of this larger initiative to stand up what's called peer-to-peer, which is what I think you're describing in LA County, that's being developed to educate peers to be able to counsel one another. It's all hands on deck is how I would frame it. And so we're not going to solve everything with wellness coach, but there's a part of the system where they are already working, and it's working well. I've been to a few rural counties, and they are very excited about this because of the lack of resources. And again, as a means to get them into clinical supports.
I would assume that this works very well in rural counties, but I'm very curious whether what you have planned for foster children, because if you look at the homeless population,
Sure,
they're all foster children.
sure. Yes, they are often. I can't answer your question. What I can do is, we are working with LA Unified. We're working with other school districts in LA and some community-based organizations as well to stand up the wellness coach. And so what I can do is go back. We're meeting with all of our grantees next week and see if I can gather some information and bring it back to staff. Yeah, because it's extraordinarily complicated.
It is very complicated. And every single one of those foster children that DCFS is in charge of needs mental health care.
They do. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Dr. Boyd.
Yeah.
Justin.
Yeah, Nick Boyd, LPCC member. Thanks again for being here. I have a few questions just to kind of better understand. So I know in the beginning you mentioned that you did some consultation with a number of community members. I was curious if any of that consultation occurred with the BBS or the Board of Psychology or any of the other behavioral health related boards.
We did not consult with the boards. We did, however, engage with practitioners as part of the stakeholder engagement process.
I'm a little curious why the boards weren't part of that conversation.
I wish I could tell you. I wasn't. I joined the project 2 years ago, and so I don't know the history. But I do know that they've worked very hard before, when it was first being developed, to engage practitioners.
Can I make a note on that? They've been engaging with it. We've been having a couple conversations, so we are kind of actively engaging on that, looking at, and one of the big things that we were talking about is the protection and making sure that these practitioners, are, I don't know what, safe. Yeah, safe. And so those conversations are going on right now. So yeah.
We've gathered some invaluable information from Steve and the staff, for example, on checking to make sure they are not out of compliance or have have had their license revoked by BBS. Because we don't want them going through another door to reach kids, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was a bit of my concern. And I guess somewhat related to that is what mechanisms are in place for consumers to make reports regarding concerns for these certified coaches? And how is HCI prepared organizationally to handle that?
We are not. The structure that we are promoting is that they engage with schools as their employer to raise concerns if there's something they fear is going on, and law enforcement as appropriate, and use those mechanisms to pursue resolution.
So should there be a concern, let's say somebody were to go that route, which I think there's some inherent obstacles just by that plan alone, right? So not everybody's going to feel comfortable going to the school necessarily. That I think the anonymity component of it is what I think makes that work really well, just as maybe a side note. But let's say they do go through that process, then what happens? How does that get back to HCI to say, hey, we need to put some sort of limitation on your credential, or how does that work?
We are actually negotiating that right now. Our immediate thought is, as we said, with to make sure they're not, what's the right word?
In violation if there's concerns, and that's what kind of they've been exploring with us, is how kind of we model how we do our, and not necessarily enforcement process. You're not
Right.
looking necessarily enforcement process, but how do we handle those situations and what our mechanisms are. And so that's why we've been in a couple conversations about how we structure that, and they're looking at how to implement something into that effect. So
Right, and to really shadow that process
Uh-huh.
so that we are aware whenever there's any evidence at all. As someone with some exposure to the child welfare system, I know that there's also adjudication in terms of any claim of abuse or neglect, and we're going to want to know about that and have that as a basis for rescinding certification. So we are actively trying to map out how to do that. Right now, there are very few individuals that are in the field. So we're kind of doing a dual track.
Okay, thank you. And then if I understand correctly, the field hours, there's a certain number that are gained during the educational component. Those are the 400 hours that are gained.
Right.
And then the 1,000 hours are after the educational under supervision.
Correct. If
And-
they're already practicing in a school, doing something that walks and talks like a wellness coach, we want to recognize that personnel and their experience.
Yeah, I just want to make clear. So there's two pathways to receive the certification. So if you're going through the education pathway, you have a 400-hour minimum to receive the full certification. If you have 150 hours, you are what's called a registered certified wellness coach. So it's somewhat like an associate status. But in the workforce pathway, where you have to have 1,000 hours minimum, there's no registered status. So you have to have the 1,000 hours minimum to work at all. But there's two pathways. The education pathways for those who have degrees that are directly related, social work, human services, addiction studies, that we think gives you a good amount of the competencies. Now, right now, we're engaged in designating specific programs that we can really look under the hood and say, no, this is 100% of the competencies that we think are important to become a wellness coach. And going forward, that will be the primary way that we produce wellness coaches.
Okay. The other question, sorry, I have a couple, I'm sorry. In terms of supervision, I know that you kind of laid out all of the different types of supervisors that could be part of that. One of the issues that we've grappled with here consistently is the lack of supervisors that we have in the field just in general.
Yes.
And our workforce development committee have done that. And I don't want to suggest that it's that there's going to be something taken away, but there's something that's going to be strained by asking the
Let me s-
limited supervisors to
I
supervise.
think I can address your and allay your concerns. So we didn't get into it, but one of the things that's happening as we begin to develop and place the workforce is a revenue stream that is following behind it. And so Department of Healthcare Services is in the process of getting the wellness coach recognized as a profession under both Medi-Cal and commercial insurance. And there's something called the fee schedule, very complicated, but that fee schedule supports work done by clinical, credentialed, and certified personnel, and within scope. And that creates a whole new funding stream to the employer that we believe will help subsidize some of that supervision.
That's great to hear.
Yeah.
I'll also add, we've conducted site visits as a part of this program where there's current wellness coaches working. And what we've heard from PPSC individuals and licensed clinicians is actually the addition of this role is actually less burdensome for them because what they can do is they can focus on establishing care plans and focusing on more severe situations where it's really a licensed clinician or a PPSC that has to be doing the work, not a wellness coach, but that some of their workload is occupied by this preventative focused work that a wellness coach can do and that they can supervise, and that on net it's actually allowing them to do more work.
I have other questions, but I'll turn it over to Justin.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Heft?
Thank you for being here. I think everyone on the board agrees that these objectives are important, and we all agree that expanding care, particularly equitable care, is of deep importance to us. But I have a number of concerns. I want to first echo Dr. Boyd's concern about hoping for more supervisors, despite the fact that we already see there's a lack of supervisors. I'm not convinced that a revenue stream to subsidize supervision will fully mitigate that, though that's nice to hear. But I have concerns that you are squeezing in a new job between a certificate position, a community health worker, for example, and a bachelor level position like a social worker, which further blurs these boundaries around what exactly the job is. And to clarify, you are talking about coaches serving preclinical needs of children, but this work is not preclinical. And virtually all of these examples are overtly clinical. The services and the competencies here that they are expected to have are already found in MFTs and LPCCs, social workers, educational psychologists. You are asking these certified wellness coaches to talk about coping skills, engage in emotional regulation practices with their clients, building insight about behavioral activation and stress recognition, stress management, interpersonal relationships. I think to any person on this board, that is therapy. That is clinical work. I think if any therapist or social worker or LPCC described their work, they would say this. So they are not only doing clinical work, despite saying that they are not, but they are also working with a very vulnerable population and also doing that with limited training. And you're saying that they shouldn't assess and diagnose and provide clinical interventions, but again, that is not what I'm seeing, one page before, one page after that's being said. This is, in some ways, therapy light, not that different than LPCCs, social workers, MFTs do in graduate school during their internships. There are some boundaries around the scope of practice, but it essentially is the same work. And I think the multiple pathways also presents concerns around accountability and consistency in training and experience. And to add to this issue, there is no exam here. How long?
15 seconds.
I think I have more time than 15 seconds. Sorry.
This is a board comment.
My apologies.
Thank you.
I've been there.
To add to this inconsistency around accountability and consistency in training. I'm not seeing anything about an exam here, which is not consistent with our other licenses. And so even if as a board we were to move away from exams, which we have talked about in the past, there are no appropriate guardrails to protect consumers as we would with any other license. And I think that my last concern is that I don't want us to be confused as a board about what the problem is or the crisis is in mental health. There is not a problem with a lack of therapists in the state. And we sometimes say that and we mistake that there is a lack of therapists. There is not. There is not data to support that. There is a problem with accessibility to quality, culturally responsive, affordable therapy. The market is saturated with mental health providers. This is a supply side problem, right? This is why wages for mental health providers have stagnated. This does not address that issue. It exacerbates it. I would worry what happens to the licensed educational psychologists, the social workers, the LPCCs, the MFTs, who will be pushed out of positions because cheaper labor is available. Cheaper, less qualified, less trained labor. And if we as a board are saying that we care about how many therapists are in the pipeline, how many are currently working, we can't in the same breath also advocate for new labor that would exacerbate the precarity of those existing positions. It is unfortunate that boards did not were not involved in this process, because it seems quite clear to me that there are multiple issues that would result from this that are already the issues we have expressed concern about as a board. And I'll pause there for other people to speak.
Thank you. Abigail?
Hi. I'm gonna just, I guess, come from my background is in working with in high professional shortage areas. And also I worked in teams where we had care coordinators and we had behavioral specialists, we had lead coordinators through wraparounds, right? So it was a lot of team approach, working with a lot of foster care kids. And then even in the world of like postpartum depression, anxiety in the medical setting, we had las promotoras, right, which are like community based peer support workers. And they all are really the support for the therapists, right, to do the deep, right, clinical work. And then there's like all this like paperwork, there's like referrals that need to be submitted. You know, it's just so much. And working as a team provides, you know, some relief to families that are waiting, you know, or that need more than once a week therapy, or sometimes even more than 2 times a week therapy. So there are some teams that, you know, are in the homes 4 times a week. So I see the need for like the low socioeconomic, right, areas where there's a lot of diversity, not a lot of people that speak Spanish, right, people of color. You know, I guess my question is, what's the appeal to be a wellness coach when there are all these other support, you know, and they have a bachelor level care coordinators and peer supports. So what is the benefit?
There are several ways to see benefit. One is from a financing perspective. Many times practitioner or the entity, the agency such as you're describing, doesn't have a revenue stream to support all the personnel that are part of that delivery care team. And so this comes with a revenue stream to support that professional. From the other perspective, as I have an MSW, and when I started out, I would love to have been a wellness coach because I didn't know what I wanted to do uh, in college. I didn't know what it would mean to practice. I chose not to pursue licensure and to take a different path, but I had to get a master's. That's an enormous commitment for the population that we're trying to attract to the field. And so part of it is creating that pathway to say, I'm going to see if I like working with children and youth. If I like it and I want to do clinical work, that I go on to get my master's and my do my clinical hours to become licensed. So we view it as a pathway to obtaining that ultimate licensure to be able to do real clinical work.
Okay, so kind of like there would be like loan forgiveness or like tuition reimbursement.
We have scholarships for wellness
scholarships
coach.
for
Yes.
those individuals. Yeah, and several of the people that I have worked in a team with that were care coordinators or behavioral specialists actually did continue their education. So this would provide a greater incentive, is what I'm hearing. Okay, so that's one question. Another question is I heard like nutrition kind of thrown out as part of what they talk about. And as a licensed therapist, I don't give any advice on nutrition. I would refer to the nutritionist, right, or the dietitian inside of the clinic. So, like, how are I feel that, I needed to hear a little bit more about how you explain that because there's so many versions of what nutrition is, and then the name is wellness, or people telling people, what supplements to take or what to eat. I'm just curious about that.
We think of nutrition from the standpoint of do you have a healthy diet or are you living on junk food? And that we do know that there are some side effects from, for example, a lot of sugar. So it's really about showing kids information so that they can make choices about how they eat.
So are there courses
Yes.
designated that they have? Is that part of the courses that they?
Yeah.
Okay, I guess I missed that, but so that's part of, and then they talk from that perspective.
Right. They're not covering anything for which they haven't been trained.
Okay. And then another thing I noticed from like the team, the coordinators that I've worked with is that like the ongoing training comes from the agencies that I've worked in, and often the agencies pay for training for the licensed therapists, but not necessarily for the care coordinators because
Right.
they don't have continuing education, right, obligations. So, that
They would enter a wellness coach. They would, every 2 years, they're recertified and they have to do some, what am I trying to say? Continuing education. Our goal, and we are assembling a whole list of continuing education courses that are available for free. A good example might be Safe Space that's provided by the Office of the Surgeon General to educate kids about, or coaches about how to recognize and support kids that have been traumatized and refer them when they see that evidence. So that's an example of the kind of continuing education. And there are others. I don't know if you, yeah.
And so your organization, or I don't know if it's organization or department, would be monitoring, like regulating all of that. Okay. And then just curious, you said that there are 600 people now in the field. So any anything you've learned so far, any highlights or any concerns that have come up?
No, what's our experience is that those 600 people really reflect individuals who have already been working in schools, performing these activities, and they're getting recognized through certification. And so they've been called community I'm trying to think of good names that we've been given as examples for, as I mentioned when I visited Modoc County last month, they have a community coordinator who has a bachelor's degree in human services. And they, and let me back up that with certification isn't just, do you have the degree, do you have the hours? They have to have someone, their employer, if it's the workforce pathway, certified that they have the specific competencies associated with being labeled a certified wellness coach. So their employer or their educator will certify that. And then they're granted a certification as a wellness coach. And so the people now, that almost 600 are people that are already practicing in the field doing this work.
Okay. And yeah, I think that's it for now. Thank you so much.
And we will have some data in March. That's our
Yeah.
first reporting cycle. And so once we begin to gather that data, we'll be able to talk more specifically and address questions you have about that workforce.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna write down names because we have a couple folks that want to go. So we're gonna do Larez, then Kelly, and then Justin, Eleanor, and then Nick. Go
Thank
ahead,
you.
Larez.
I don't have necessarily questions, but I have some perspective.
Okay.
I'm not a clinician, but I was a director of a teen club for many, many years and worked in nonprofit.
Mhm.
And I am extremely excited about this because there is a gap. This fills an extremely big gap.
Mhm.
I know that we say there's enough clinicians, but what I found is that, and I was in a kind of a rural area also, there were not enough clinicians. And what we had is a lot of young people with gaps that are not at the level where they maybe need severe mental health intervention, but the dealing with the life issues, right? Those life issues that happen in school, bullying, dealing with family resources, lack of family resources, sexual health, all these different things that maybe not were at the level of a clinician, but they needed the support and the guidance in between. And I will say that I had staff who were doing it. They were doing this role without any education, without any certification, without anyone giving them to them. They were just doing the best that they could. And so I like knowing that now there's going to be some required education and experience when you're doing this because it really, really is needed. And it's needed now more than ever. I think it will also help create a pipeline of people who may not have seen themselves as a clinician or further going to licensure saying like this, I can now see myself really going and creating so I think it is creating a pipeline of people who will do this and start to think about how they can further advance in it. I think it is a pathway. I think that what I'm seeing in youth right now, there is so much need there and there is not the resources there. And so when we're talking about nutrition, coping mechanisms, conflict resolution, how to deal with difficult relationships with friends, families. They may not be at the level of a clinician, but the support is desperately needed there. And then talking about Susan and foster youth, absolutely. And there's a lot of life lessons and transferable social emotional development that needs to be supported that may not be at the level of a clinician. And I'm telling you how many times we tried to make referrals, get families and young people help, and there was no one there or no one to bridge until you could get those deeper services that you need. But I found very often we were the canary in the coal mine of like, this kid needs further help and no one's getting it to them, and how can we support them in that? So for me, I can't say that enough how I'm excited about this. I think it is so desperately needed, but in particular, like the rural area that I was in. And I know that my fellow board members are really looking at what are the gaps in terms of security, being sure that youth are safe and children are safe and all these other things. I think they're super, super important as this further grows, but I see such a desperate need for it. But like I said, I've seen people doing this work without this education and certification and all those kinds of things, just doing the best they can. So I'm glad there's a more formalized approach, bridging that time, that gap into where either they can get the further services they need or just helping with life management, because that's what we're really seeing, that these young people are needing helping managing the things, essential ways of being in life. So I have a little bit of a different perspective around that, but I also think all the safeguards and the concerns that my fellow board members are going to probably have brought up are of deep concern, but I see why this is important and why the gap has been there. So I'm really excited about this going forward, and I appreciate all the work and time and energy that went into it. I know there's more to learn, but I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Okay, Kelly?
I am Kelly. I'm also a board member. Thank you so much for coming. I have a few questions. You mentioned tribal health programs and rural health clinics,
Yes.
and you also mentioned American Indian Maternal Support Services. Was part of your stakeholder group, did you include tribal organizations, Indian Health Services?
Mhm. One of the challenges that we confront right now is that, and we have an example recently of um, a tribal community school that would love to have a wellness coach, and they can't find anybody who has an associate or bachelor degree. And so they have to depend on the peer support specialist or the community health worker. But our hope is that by creating a pipeline to educate them specifically, that we can attract individuals with that education to work in those settings.
Okay. And, in the triumvirate of MHRT, peer support specialist, community health worker, and certified wellness coach, you mentioned you had 600 people that are already certified. Who is supervising these people?
They're primarily supervised by pupil personnel, individuals in the schools, your education psychologist, your school social worker, school nurse,
Okay.
school counselor.
Because one dimension of this is that, PBS's jurisdiction is our licensees and our registrants. I guess there's an ethical dimension as to how they're supervising these CWCs to ensure that they don't kind of overstep into therapy and that they're engaging in ethical practice. And,
Yes.
and that's a part of the regulatory code, which is not really well developed. And there's really no interpretive guidance inside of our ethics guidelines for that. And so if these CWCs are kind of moving forward, I think BBS would probably have to move very quickly to establish some interpretive statements of, how are you supposed to supervise CWCs? What should we do? And it probably would have been helpful had HCI kind of come to us earlier and said, so this is what a CWC is. We are going to put these folks underneath licensees. And so how does that kind of fit in with your ethical guidelines and your notion of supervision? Because the supervision is not going to be the same for like a registrant. It's going to be profoundly different. And then I guess the last thing is, I'm a little concerned with how this is going to fit in with KDA, which is kind of the screening modality for all foster kids. And I've worked with foster kids my whole career. We mentioned Los Angeles. Los Angeles has the greatest proportion of foster youth in the entire state of California and dwarfs most foster youth systems throughout the United States. One of the major problems that urban jurisdictions have is ensuring proper screening. I wouldn't want CWCs to kind of overstep into screening and
Absolutely.
assessment.
I couldn't agree more that is not an appropriate role for a wellness coach to screen foster children. Their role is to say, I think I'm seeing some need here, and to refer them for that screening by the appropriate credentialed or licensed personnel.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you so much for coming. I appreciate all the work you've put into this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Justin?
Yeah, I just want to add to my earlier comments, and I absolutely agree that children in foster youth need more support. I think the main problem that I'm seeing, one of the main problems, is that this does not address those needs without creating more downstream problems that undermine that work. You know, we are creating this new position, and you're saying that it is explicitly designed to be attractive to low-income people of color, to diversify this workforce. And this new position is almost certainly paid less than existing master's work, which is already near poverty wage. This does not create upward mobility for them. And it certainly doesn't create a more equitable, culturally responsive mental health force, right? What it does is it creates clusters of low-paid, low-status, underemployed workers of color who are operating underneath a completely unchanged demographic of licensed mental health professionals. If it was any other job that was being proposed, we would say that this is overtly predatory. To target low-income people of color, to say, move into this workforce where under the guise that it's increasing diversity overall, this is reifying the exact racial socioeconomic hierarchies that we as a board have talked about being concerned, having concerns of. And I think that we need to keep in mind that you cannot provide good quality care as a mental health worker if the workers don't have material conditions that allow them to be sustainable. And if we are designing a job that is by design consisting of a marginalized group, putting them into a precarious position, job market with limited upward mobility, squeezing them in between two classes of underpaid people, this does not seem like it's addressing the very problems that we are talking about. And that is, I think, of great concern to me, that we are creating a solution that exacerbates what we are already worried about.
So I just want to address that. So we, in supporting this new role, one factor is this is a position that already exists, whether we certify it or not. That was said earlier. Most of the people that are currently working in the role were already employed in a school setting, receiving a salary, whatever that salary was. But with our grants that we funded the position at, we ensure that the amount of money that is funded for these salaried positions are in line with the living wage in California. They're not poverty level jobs. And the job postings that are currently up for wellness coaches are not poverty level wages. We've also had scholarships to support people going into this position, and also scholarships that support people who are currently at the bachelor's level and would like to become a licensed clinician. We have funded those scholarships at historically high levels. We recently increased the undergraduate level to $35,000 a year, which is the best scholarship that I know of in the behavioral health sphere on a yearly basis to fund cost of attendance and cost of living. So this has been like a central concern for us, is that we're not making a dead-end job here. We also don't envision that somebody is a lifetime certified wellness coach. The hope here is to eventually get different kinds of people to be licensed clinicians than the current people who are licensed clinicians. And we're seeing that in the population that's currently wellness coaches, more like overwhelmingly Hispanic in the numbers that we have preliminarily. We'll release those numbers when we have a full report. I believe you said it was March, Ann. But that has been front and center as we've designed the role, is that we do not want to design a role for people that are already in precarious situations and then put them in a job that's a dead-end job that we can't support in the future.
I know we don't have the time today, nor is it an agenda item, but at some future point, we just did an extensive supply demand analysis in the behavioral health space that looks at, in particular, non-prescribing licensed professionals. We share your concern about a maldistribution and the problem with where they are in the private sector and not reaching into the public workspace more. But we have a $2 billion program about to come online to expand that workforce that works in the public sector. So at some point, if you want to hear more about the supply demand work that we've done with the consultation of Boston Consulting Group and our researchers at HCI, as well as this very large initiative, 5-year initiative to expand the behavioral health workforce with an emphasis on licensed clinicians working in the public sector.
Thank you, Eleanor.
Okay, thank you for being here. Okay, so I wanted some clarity on the supervision. You had mentioned there's like a student track and there's a professional track, and there's like 400 and 1,000 to 2,000. Is it 1 hour a week supervision? Does it matter how many students they see?
What we laid out in the slide is what we have recommended to our grantees. And we actually included in our grants support for supervision hours. And we believe that a clinician or a pupil personnel, counselor, social worker can support up to 4 wellness coaches. We do not want to overburden them with this responsibility without making sure that we're lightening their load in terms of their work activities to make them available to do that supervision as Christian described earlier.
So is that 1 hour a week?
It could be
1 hour each person, more than that?
I think it depends on the situation as to how experienced and the role that
Okay.
the school is assigning to that
Okay.
coach.
Just worked in field probably about at least 20 years, and I don't usually give people more than 2 because I notice that they get impacted. The students and whoever's being supervised gets impacted. So I think actually that is too much. And that's not even counting if they're supervising other people, other students, or maybe people else have associates.
Right.
So that's already something I would recommend that you look more into. As far as the other thing is, sometimes nowadays it just seems like there's not enough space in the schools, with all the interns placed there, and there's all the online people, everybody's competing, they don't have enough space. So if you're saying, there's going to be other people, so it's just, space is a huge issue. And so I would hope that maybe they might even consider, if it's bring a trailer or something to so that it's not more of an issue. I know it was already brought up about competing against, World War II and how many associates a licensed person can supervise. So in a sense, it also competes with that. And I know that the recommendation is for a licensed person or a PPS to provide that. So that's already a challenge. And then also coming from the schools, the PPS, they also, they have to supervise. It's just, there's a lot of things that need to be considered.
And I hope we learn more with this grant program to be able to better inform the practices you're describing it.
Yeah. I think there was one more. So I would say if they're really coming, I'm glad you're working with the community colleges and the schools, the Cal States, because that would be a rate of students. So I guess my concern is just all the other people coming. So it's already a challenge, like I said, the space wise. What I've noticed, I have a young child and I'm still in school, but it seems like there's not very many mentoring, not very many groups. I don't know if this is something that they could look at. And the last thing was, Oh, yeah, on the supervision, you had mentioned that there's some areas like as far as the reservations that maybe you may not have. Are you considering virtual supervision or does it have to be somebody maybe they hire on?
I think that's something for us to understand better as we figure out how to actually place or work with tribes around tribal schools to hire these personnel, what that looks like. And unfortunately, none of our grantees are tribes, tribal schools, but we believe that the experience we're going to gain from our grant program is going to help inform what is possible. We know that there's a gap. We don't know how it's going to be filled in terms of these personnel in every setting. Yeah.
I'm sorry, there was one more last thing. With the people right now currently, I know I'm from the Central Valley and I think we're more forward thinking as far as in some areas is for having a lot of our high schools might have now more recently like a counselor therapist on site. That's not always the case. In the past, it's been maybe they split their time between 2 or 3 schools. And some of those schools, if they're high schools, they might be at least 2,000 people. So I'm just telling you, not every school has a PPS person on site, especially full-time, or a licensed person, especially full-time. Just something to think about because if you're saying they have to have the supervision, it's kind of slim, so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and then we'll do Nick and Susan, then unless people feel strongly, we might be wrapping up, take a break, so.
I just wanted to follow up to a couple of things. I just want to say I really strongly agree with what Board Member Huff said. I think he echoed a lot of my concerns that I was going to raise earlier. But I did want to come back and just really, I think, emphasize 2 things. You answered my question that I was going to ask about, if the intent is to create a pipeline, how are we supporting people on the back end? In other words, how are we supporting them to actually get the degree? There's an issue with students being able to afford to go to college.
Right.
And then take on another set of debt to go to school. And I guess my thoughts would be that if we're really supporting that, we're supporting them there.
Exactly.
To make it affordable for them.
I
to go to
agree. As a former foster youth I couldn't imagine taking on debt to go to college. It was scholarships. And we see that we have that same perspective. Scholarships are crucial for individuals to move up the pipeline to securing licensure. And again, I don't want to get into it because it's very complex, but the program that we're going to be standing up will address additional aspects of creating supervision opportunities for associates and graduate students in the professions that lead to licensure.
Thank you. And the other thing I think I just really want to leave here with is that I have really, really, really strong concerns about there being a parallel process to manage disciplinary requirements of these certified wellness coaches. I'm looking again at your example sites. This expands well beyond schools. You have pretty much every community mental health organization in the state represented here. And if you're suggesting that there's already 600 in a few months, that we're just going to kind of build the airplane as we're flying it, I don't know that that's really going to work. I think there needs to be some serious consideration about how you are rolling this out and giving people the avenue and the mechanism to protect these consumers, especially if there's no teeth in the recommendations of the supervision. I mean, it sounds like it's a recommendation, not a requirement. So that first and foremost is my strongest concern. And then paralleled with that is that there's, for example, everybody here who's a licensed clinician, we're required to notify where to file these complaints at. We give them very concrete phone numbers of the board. Our license numbers are now attached to it. So there's very specific information on where they can actually go to make that request. The other part of that too is that there's no information given at this level, assuming that this is the first contact that they're potentially having with any sort of behavioral health person in terms of what their parameters are within their scope. So are these individuals even being informed of here's what I can do or cannot do? Or is it just assumed that they're going to do that based upon their own practice? And I don't know the answer to that, but I think I just really want to emphasize the importance of not thinking we're going to continue to build this workforce and not have the process in place to support how we ensure the consumer's protection. I think that really needs to be given serious thought.
Thank you for that.
And Susan, last comment, and then we'll go to, oh, Abigail, then, okay. We'll do Abigail and Kelly. We are overdue for a break and we still have public comments. So Susan, go ahead.
I have a very quick question. I think you mentioned $2 billion that you have available, but I wasn't sure what it's available for. And you mentioned that you don't want to set people up in dead-end jobs. So is there money available for people to move on? Should they decide they want to get a master's degree or
That's right.
go to social work school?
Yeah.
There is. That $2 billion includes a scholarship program as well as other revenues that are coming because of Prop 1 into workforce development and behavioral health that will support scholarships. So our plan is for the foreseeable future to offer scholarships for individuals wanting to advance their education.
So any people that we know of now who would like to do this but don't have the money, we should recommend that they should become a wellness coach, and then they'll be getting the money to move on in school.
That's right, beginning in January of 26. Yes.
And I will say that's not
Thank
just
you.
for people that want to become a wellness coach. That's for anybody that wants to work in the behavioral health profession. So we don't just offer wellness coach scholarships. We offer a broad range of scholarships that are available to anybody that wants to pursue a health profession.
Through a PhD.
Yeah.
Through a PhD in or PsyD in psychology, all the whole pipeline. Yes, including supervision hours. Because we know clinicians don't have enough time, we will be subsidizing clinical hours for supervision.
Thank you, Abigail, and then Kelly.
So thank you for mentioning that people that are becoming coaches are already working, right? But now they're getting trained, whereas before they were there, maybe they had some training, but now there is more management of what, right, what trainings, specific trainings they're getting. So I think, we're actually leveling up the work of the individuals that are already there. So my question is, how do we ensure that the counties that need it the most are getting, they're getting those scholarships?
So we are working on what we call scoring criteria, which is the process by which we determine who is awarded a scholarship. And one of the criteria will be what we call underserved communities, or I think it was mentioned by another speaker, what we call shortage service areas, health
Professional shortage
area,
Yes.
right, HIPSA.
Mhm.
So that is under development as part of the scoring in the future. Yes.
Okay, yes. And my last,
And I'll just interrupt to say one thing. The grants that we just awarded, we targeted Title I schools, which we know are low income.
okay, my last question, I promise, is it seems like this is a done deal, right? And you're coming here to just share with us what's unfolded and what's going to unfold. So I'm just curious, do you have any questions for us, or
We
what
have
is the
learned a lot.
intention?
We have learned a lot today.
Okay.
We appreciate the feedback that we're getting. I want to genuinely assure you that we will be discussing it and looking at how to address some of what's raised. Particularly, we want to talk about assuring public safety and child safety. That's something we've been talking about. And we wanted to look at how that works best and collaborate with the board on that as we've begun this dialogue. Yeah.
When you guys say we, like who's we? Is it you and
We've
Steve?
been having DCA psychology board us, and we've been having conversations with them about the really just focusing on the enforcement right now. So we can also broaden those conversations. So
Right.
Yeah, and maybe get some regular updates on
Mm.
those conversations, right? Because I think for me, this is the first time I've heard of this just through the newsletter that I've been receiving through HCI, my own personal,
Notices.
email, notices. You guys do a great job, by the way, of that. But this is the first time I'm hearing about it here on the board. Mhm.
this could be a start. That's kind of,
This is the big one. Okay.
And I'll just offer that not just to the board, but you as individuals, if you have questions, if we need to set up a call, we need to chat through something, like I'll just offer that to you right now and you can reach out. I think our emails and our reach out email is at the end of the presentation. So
Yeah.
I'll just offer that to you. Would love to chat.
And there's an email at the end of the slides, and Christian manages that email account. So you will be reaching us, a live person.
Go ahead, Kelly.
So I would ask staff to investigate whether publishing a circular or email to licensees and registrants is warranted about the outlines of supervising a CWC and how the interplay between 4892 and the scope of supervision for registrants and licensees, and how that interplays with supervising a CWC, even if they're PPS. They might be a PPS clinician, they might be one of our licensees in PPS, and what our interpretation of that is. Because I think if there's 600 CWCs out there, we should probably provide some guidance. And that's all.
Seeing no other hands raised. I think the email's in the slide, so we'll get that for you, Susan. Okay. Okay. Seeing no further comments on the board, we'll go to audience members in person. Any comments or questions?
Hello again, Shanti Ezrin with Camped. Well, I'm looking at the both of your backs. I'm sorry about that, but Anne and Christian, thank you for being here today and making the presentation, and really appreciate the attention in your presentation to the two aspects of how wellness coaches fit into the pipeline with licensed clinicians and also how they're supervised. And also really appreciate just all the different comments and questions from board members today. Camped, we're looking forward to just engaging with HCI further on this continued rollout of the program, especially on two issues that board members have already touched on today quite heavily: access to healthcare services while ensuring consumer protection, and then number two, supporting pathways to licensure for those who are working in these certified and credentialed positions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments in person? Seeing none. Moderator, are there any remote participants that wish to comment?
There certainly are. Um, First want to mention, Leah Brew, if you are still interested in commenting, please raise your hand and get in the queue. Our first request for comment comes from Kathy Atkins. We're going to send you a request to unmute your microphone. For everyone else, now is the time to raise your hand if you haven't already. You can do so by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users, dial *3 to raise a hand. We will call on people in the order we have requests.
Hi, this is Kathy Atkins from CAMPT. I also joined Shanti in thanking everyone for the presentation today and the great questions. I also wanted to add to what Shanti said, that we recognize the dearth of mental health access to care for not just the K through 12, but generally. Um, and we want to work with stakeholders to ensure consumer protection. Earlier this year, there was a bill, I believe it was 1318, that was introduced about suicide crises in the schools, and they listed they had mental health professionals like behavioral health licensees there to intervene. And the original introduction included wellness coaches as mental health professionals that would do the suicide crisis. And after working with the author, we worked on it so that it ended up being moving forward. But I just think it's important that with any new licensure or certification or group of providers in the mental health world, that there's definitely a place, and we want to be careful while the group here, is very articulate and on top of sort of scopes and areas of expertise, but those that are creating
15
legislation
seconds.
don't always have the background, so I just think it's important for those who are moving forward with this to be aware of wellness coaches might be stuck in legislation. Make sure it's what you have envisioned. So thank you.
Thank you. Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Sabrina D. Morris. Hold on just a moment. We're going to send you a request to unmute your microphone. And for David Kovacs, feel free to raise your hand if you're interested in asking your question.
Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Sabrina Morris. I have been a licensed LPCC since 2000. My original license was in another state. I am the current Board of Directors President for the California Association for Licensed Professional Clinical Counselors. And I have spent almost 20 years of my career serving in shortage areas, working in very impoverished areas, setting up in-school behavioral health care programs, working with the education, juvenile justice, and behavioral health care systems in the area. And I echo the strong concerns of the board members in regards to public safety issue, as well as the workforce development issues, coming from the aspect of setting up school-based programs starting in pre-K to 12. I have strong concerns that we're expecting paraprofessionals to have knowledge of all areas of wellness and to be able to deliver these services when they are the least trained, expected to serve the most areas to the most vulnerable populations. So what we're asking them to do is a great reach, and I just echo the concerns that we've heard today. And as an LPCC and as a member of CalPEC, I would be willing to
15 seconds.
help the organization mine for information. But I think we also have to be careful to say we're going to take this information and apply it to tribal communities, because that's a leap. So we cannot do the research and apply it to school systems that we're not actually serving.
Thank you for your comment. Give me just a moment longer to see if we have any more requests for public comment. David Kovacs, I'm going to send you a request to unmute your microphone if you All right, I'm going to read a comment aloud from David Kovacs. Is there any training for CWCs on how to address the effects of technology and social media on minors?
We, at this point, do not include that as part of the training. It is an issue we're aware of, as has been raised by the U.S. Surgeon General.
Thank you.
And those are all of our requests for public comment at the moment.
Great, thank you. Thank you both for being here and participating in this robust discussion with us. So thank you for your time. We'll be looking to take a break, a 15-minute break to give everybody time to stretch their legs. So we will be back at 11:26. Welcome back. We will be continuing our meeting with item 19, the discussion and possible action regarding proposed amendments to the Business and Professions Code, supervision for professional clinical counselor trainees, W-2 forms for supervised experience claimed, unprofessional conduct provisions for telehealth, and degree program certification and meeting licensure requirements. And Roseanne, we'll turn this over to you.
Thanks, Wendy. So every year, staff reviews the board statutes and regulations to determine if there's any technical, minor, or non-substantive changes needed. And then we usually run that either in the omnibus bill that the legislature runs every year or in the board sunset bill, which is typically run every 4 years. And so at the September meeting, we looked at some bigger amendments for this year's, probably for that's going to go into this year's sunset bill, and we have a few smaller amendments that we've looked at over the past month or so that the board also may wish to consider including as cleanup either in this year's sunset or omnibus bill. So I'm going to go through each of the 4 items and then I'll open it up for discussion at the end. The first proposed change is to amend Business and Professions Code 4999.46.2, which pertains to supervision for professional clinical counselor trainees. And you can find that language in attachment A, but basically that language states that for experience gained, no more than 6 hours of supervision, whether individual, triadic, or group, shall be credited during any single week. The statement is misleading and confusing because PCC trainees are not permitted to count pre-degree hours. It's probably was placed in there in the Practice Act because it's in there for MFT trainees. However, MFT trainees can count pre-degree hours while PCC trainees cannot. So we're proposing to delete that above sentence as it serves no purpose and is misleading. It needs to be deleted in 2 sections. That particular section of law has a sunset clause in January and then a sunrise clause due to the supervision via video conferencing, which we're also going to be looking at for the last meeting. But to do things all technically correctly, we need to make the amendment in both sections. So that's the first proposal. The second proposal has to do with amending LMFT, LCSW, and LPCC law regarding W-2 forms for supervised experience claimed. Currently, the law requires associates applying for those 3 license types to provide the board with copies of their W-2 forms for each year of experience claimed upon application for a licensure. We run into situations where somebody's applying for licensure and they might not have a W-2 form yet for that particular year in which they're gaining experience, the current year that they're applying. The W-2 form is not issued usually until the end of January. And so they may run into a situation where they can't provide it. And so in that case, the board right now, we request a copy of the most recent pay stub for that year. So we just want to add that clarification into law for consistency. So we have it we were able to point to it in law that the associate needs to provide the board a copy of the most recent pay stub if that year's W-2 is not available. So that's the second proposal. The third proposal has to do with just cleaning up some of our unprofessional conduct provisions, specifically the one related to telehealth. All 4 of our practice acts contain an unprofessional conduct provision. that state, basically in some form states that violation of Business and Professions Code 2290.5, which is the requirements for telehealth services, that violating that particular section is unprofessional conduct, but each of our 4 practice acts says it in a slightly different way. Staff believe that it is stated best in the LPCC law 499.90 subdivision AC, where it says failing to comply with the procedures set forth in section 290.5 when delivering healthcare via telehealth is unprofessional conduct. So staff is recommending that each practice act, that particular unprofessional conduct clause or subdivision, be amended to be like the LPCC one. And then finally, we have a technical change that we're proposing related to LMFT law, and it has to do with the required degree program certification that that a school has to fill out stating that their program meets registration and license requirements. Both sections of MFT law, we have 4980.36 and 37. They contain, those are the 2 sections of LMFT law that contain degree requirements. 4980.36 is for the current degree requirements. 4980.37 is a kind of a grandfathered list of requirements for older degrees that were gained basically essentially before 2012. Applicants with older degrees qualifying under the old requirements, 4980.37, must also complete additional coursework described in Business and Professions Code section 4980.41 before sitting for their license exams. And 2 of the requirements in that particular section are alcoholism and chemical substance dependency, and also spousal and partner abuse assessment, detection, and intervention. Prior to 2014, those 2 courses must have been completed within the qualifying degree program, and the way that the law was awarded at the time, if they were not in the degree program, they could not be remediated, and basically to qualify for a licensure meant that somebody needed to go and get a entirely new degree. So that was an unintended consequence that we had identified in 2014, and at the time the board ran legislation stating that applicants who did not have that coursework in their qualifying degree did not need to obtain an entirely new degree, that they were able to remediate it outside of the degree program by taking it either by an additional master's level course or by an accepted CE provider course. However, there is still a miswording in the law, Business and Professions Code 4980.38, which requires degree programs to certify that their degree meets the requirements for licensure, and it's mistakenly still mentions that schools with degrees qualifying under 4980.37 needs to certify that those 2 courses are contained in the qualifying degree. So we are just proposing to strike that language as it's no longer relevant or required. So those are the 4 cleanup changes that we're proposing for the omnibus or sunset bill today, and I will open it up for further discussion. I should also mention we discussed this at the Policy and Advocacy Committee meeting in October, and the committee recommended that the board consider it as a legislative proposal.
Thank you, Roseanne. Look to any board members for questions or comments. Seeing none, would any member like to make a motion? Right. And Roseanne, you may need to prompt what the motion is.
I can do. The motion would be to direct staff to make any discussed changes and any non-substantive changes and to pursue as a legislative proposal.
Great. Would anybody like to make that motion?
So moved.
Second? Eleanor? Okay, do we have any questions or comments from our in-person audience on this one?
Hello, Shanti Ezrin with CAMT. No questions, no concerns. Just wanted to thank you, Roseanne, and thank you, staff, for your work on these proposed amendments, and specifically amendment number 2 that you had kind of went over, providing clarification around the W-2 forms. Something that's definitely going to support our associates. So thank you for all the work and no concerns.
Seeing no other comments in the room, moderator, do we have any online comments?
We are open for public comment via WebEx. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3. We will call on people in the order we have requests. And our first request comes from GV Ayers. Hold on just a moment. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
GV Ayers, representing the California Association for Licensed Professional Clinical Counselors. We've looked at this and appreciate the work that you've done and the detailed work that y'all do in making things match up. Appreciate that and are supportive of what you're proposing regarding LPCCs. Thank you.
And that was our only request via WebEx.
Okay, thank you very much. Looks like we're ready for a vote. Christina, will you call the roll?
Flores Bailey,
Yes.
Abigail Ortega,
Yes.
Kelly Ronasinghe,
Yes.
Justin Huff,
Yes.
Wendy Strack,
Yes.
Susan Friedman,
Yes.
Dr. Annette Walker,
Yes.
Eleanor Uribe, Dr. Nicholas Boyd.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. On to item 20, is the discussion and possible action to initiate a rulemaking to amend the board's additional examination time English as a second language regulations. Roseanne.
Thanks, Wendy. So the board established its ESL additional examination time allowance via regulations back in 2017. The regulations supersede any allowances offered by the board's test vendors, and they allow the board to grant an additional examination time of 1.5 times to an ESL applicant if they meet one of 3 possible ways of qualifying. They can either qualify with a score of 85 or below on the TOEFL IBT test. They can qualify with documentation from their qualifying master's degree that their program had granted the applicant additional exam time or an allowance due to speaking English as a second language. Or they could qualify if their qualifying master's degree was obtained from a school outside the US and at least half the coursework was presented in a language other than English. And during the committee process, when we were doing the work to look at this proposal, the board looked at the accommodations for its exam vendors on behalf of the board. That includes ASWB for the national LCSW exam, NBCC for the national LPCC exam, and then Pearson VUE is the administrator for all board developed exams. That right now includes the LMFT clinical exam, the LEP exam, and all of the board's law and ethics exams for each license types. And each of these vendors have their own ESL allowances. However, the board's ESL requirements override those right now. So we looked at ASWB's requirements. They allow additional time up to 2 extra hours and use of a dictionary. And the way that you qualify for that, the applicant must certify under penalty of perjury that their primary or first language is one other than English. NBCC has a little bit more stringent criteria. They allow 1.5 times and the use of a dictionary, but you have to qualify by taking the TOEFL, having an ESL allowance taken in the past 10 years, or eligible for or participating in an English language learner program within the past 10 years. So it's kind of more in line with what the board does to qualify now. And then Pearson VUE allows 1.5 times on the exam and possible but rarely use of a dictionary. They have to complete a form containing basic personal information and have a letter on official letterhead from an instructor or employer that verifies English as their second language. So the different qualifications when the agencies are left to their own are kind of all over the place. The Workforce Development Committee considered this topic in its January and April meetings this past year. It directed staff to do various research. We looked at the board's current exam allowances and compared those with the amount that 1.5 times would allow, and that's shown in attachment B. Another thing that we did is we reviewed the ESL allowances of other DCA boards to determine what else is out there at DCA. A lot of boards, including occupational therapy, physical therapy, optometry, vet med, dental board, and dental hygiene do not have ESL allowances. Acupuncture board does not have ESL regulations, but they offer their exam in 3 languages and have a mechanism in law to request translation into another language if that language is spoken by 5% of the applicants. And then Psychology Board has ESL regulations that are very similar to this board's. It requires a TOEFL score of 85 or below taken in the past 2 years, with time and a half being the allowance provided. So the proposed amendments show what the Workforce Development Committee, the language that the Workforce Development Committee developed over this past year. The language creates a new option to qualify for an ESL allowance by certifying the following under penalty of perjury. The applicant would have to certify, I certify that I do not speak English as my primary language, and I most frequently speak another language to communicate with others and have difficulty reading, writing, or speaking English proficiently. And that was kind of that allowance is kind of in line with the ASWB model of doing an attestation. In developing the language, the board's regulatory council advised using that language based on the California Civil Rights Department's definition of limited English proficient persons, and also primary language that's in their regulations. And I've included a link to those specific regulations where the Civil Rights Department has those defined. And so that was particular option was added to the language. You can see that in attachment A, which is under consideration for today. The Policy and Advocacy Committee considered the proposal shown in attachment A at its August meeting of this past year, and directed staff to bring that language as written to the board for consideration as a regulatory proposal. So that's where we are today. We can open it up for discussion. There's 2 motions that need to be read in full, depending on what the board wants to do. And depending on if the board has any changes to the language. So what we can do is open it up for discussion, and then based on what the board wants to do, we can read the desired motion into the minutes. So hand it back over to Wendy.
Great, thank you. To any board members for comments or questions? Seeing none, do we have any in-person comments?
Good morning, Ben Caldwell, MFT. This has been discussed at some length in the Workforce Committee. Really appreciate the work of the committee and staff to land at a place that will enable more of those who actually should qualify for this accommodation to receive it. Certainly support the proposed language and request that you move it forward. Thank you. Shanti Ezrin with CAMT, echo what Ben had said. Thank you, staff, for your work on these amendments. It will definitely lessen burdens for ESL applicants, and we have no concerns around the new option to qualify. Thank you.
Thank you. And seeing no other comments in person, moderator, do we have any online comments?
We are open for public comment on agenda item 20. If you would like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of your screen. Dial-in users, dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. Our first request comes from GV Ayers. Hold on just a moment. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
This is G.V. Ayers with the California Association for Licensed Professional Clinical Counselors. I'd like to associate our remarks with what has been stated before by the in-person audience there. I appreciate very much your work on this, and we encourage the adoption of this. Thank you.
And that was our only request via WebEx.
Thank you. And I went a little out of order. I should have asked for a motion first. So now I'll ask for a motion, and then we'll have to check back in on comments. But apologize for that. Does anybody want to make the motion as about to be described by Roseanne?
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that nobody seems to have any changes. So if the board wanted to move forward with no changes, it would be motion A. So I'm going to read motion A right now. Motion A is to approve the proposed regulatory text in attachment A and complete all of the following actions. 1, direct staff to submit the text in attachment A to the director of the Department of Consumer Affairs and the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency for review, and if no adverse comments are received, authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to initiate the rulemaking process, make any non-substantive changes to the package, and set the matter for a hearing requested. And then number 2, if no adverse comments are received during the 45-day comment period and no hearing is requested, authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to complete the rulemaking and adopt the proposed regulations as noticed for Title 16, California Code of Regulations, Section 1805.2.
Would like Dr. Walker?
Yes, thank you, Roseanne. I would like to make the motion on motion A, but is it necessary for me to as stated? Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Ms. Bailey? Thank you. Okay. Now we have to go back out for comments on the motion. So any in-person comments other than what was already said? Thank you for your patience. And moderator, do we have any online comments on the motion?
We'll check really quickly. If you'd like to make a comment on the motion, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise your hand. We will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to continue with the motion?
Yes, thank you. Christina, would you call the vote, please?
Dr. Nicholas Boyd,
Yes.
Eleanor Uribe,
No.
Burnett Walker,
Yes, and Christina, who made the second? Who seconded?
Flores,
Thank you. Okay.
Susan Friedman,
Yes.
Wendy Strack,
Yes.
Justin Huft,
Yes.
Kelly Ronasinghe,
Yes.
Abigail Ortega,
Yes.
Lorez Bailey.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
Quickly, I just want to say thank you. It's been nice working with you all year. I'm going to take my leave unless you think you need me to hang around for anything else.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great holiday seasons. Bye.
Right. On to item 21, discussion and possible action regarding statutory amendments to licensing requirements for licensed educational psychologists. Roseanne, we're back to you again.
Yeah, so the board actually approved this item at the last meeting, but we tinkered with one piece of the language, and there was a little bit of a question of whether it was non-substantive or not. So just for safety, we're bringing it back one more time. So the purpose of this agenda item is to discuss potential amendments to Business and Professions Code 4989.20, which is the section of statute that specifies licensing requirements for licensed educational psychologists. Attachment A shows the proposed statutory amendments, and today the focus of the discussion is to focus on one amendment from last time, the last board meeting in September, to 4989.20A4 on page 27-1 of your packet. Like I said, the board approved this proposal at the September 2024 meeting and directs staff to approve it as a legislative proposal. However, at the meeting, a board member raised a concern about the language in subdivision A4 requiring completion of, quote, 60 semester hours of postgraduate work in pupil personnel services. And there was concern about the use of the term 60 semester hours and whether that's in line with what's currently the most common type of language today, because it is a very old code section. So we investigated further and consulted with stakeholders, including CASP and the California Commission on Teaching Credentialing. And after that consultation, staff believes the following amendment provides more clarity and better aligns with the CTC credentialing program standards. And it would instead say successful completion of 60 semester units or 90 quarter units of postgraduate study in pupil personnel services. And so that change is shown in attachment A. I'm not going to go through everything else unless somebody has a specific question about the other amendments since they were already approved by the board, but we just wanted to run that amendment by the board to get formal approval.
Great. Thank you, Roseanne. Any comments or questions from the board? It's pretty simple. Do we want to have a motion? Yeah, we need to direct staff to make any discussed changes or any non-substantive changes and to pursue as a legislative proposal. So we would just do non-substantive changes.
I'll motion to do that as we, as you stated. So moved.
Okay, we have a second.
A second.
Ellie, thank you. All right, do we have any in-person comments on this item? Seeing none. Moderator, do we have any online comments?
We are open for public comment via WebEx for item 21. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of your screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise a hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to continue with the motion?
Yes, thank you. Christina, will you call the vote?
Perez Bailey,
Yes.
Abigail Ortega,
Yes.
Kelly Ronasinghe,
Yes.
Justin Huff,
Yes.
Wendy Strack,
Yes.
Susan Friedman,
Yes.
Dr. Annette Walker,
Yes.
Eleanor Uribe,
Yes.
Dr. Nicholas Boyd.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Next on the agenda is item 22, board-sponsored and monitored legislation. And Roseanne, we're sticking with you today.
Okay. In terms of the legislative update, so the deadline for the governor to make decisions on all bills that made it to his desk was September 30th. So we now have full answers on everything that the board was tracking this year or sponsoring. So SB 1024 was the bill that the board sponsored this year. And that bill made 2 changes to the board's statutory requirements. It made some changes regarding the requirement to physically display a license or registration to account for when services are provided via telehealth. And then it also made some clarifications of the number of supervisees that a supervisor is permitted to oversee. And there are now extensive FAQs. There's 2 FAQs on our website, one for each of those since they're kind of separate issues. They are on the very top of the homepage of our website. And then a listserv was also sent out to our subscriber base, and we've been utilizing social media to get the word out as well as our associations. So we're working to implement getting the word out on that because it will be most of the changes will be taking effect January 1st. There is a tiny provision regarding the required notice that will be taking effect this coming July. But so we're working on implementation for that. The board's omnibus bill, which has had a really tiny technical change this year, SB 1526 was also signed by the governor. And then in terms of some things that happened with bills since the board met last, SB 26, which was the CARE Scholarship Program for Mental Health Professions, was vetoed by the governor. In his veto message, he cited budget issues in existing HCAI programs. And then also since the last board meeting, SB 1067 was vetoed by the governor. That had to do with expediting the license process for medically underserved populations. In his veto message, the governor cited concerns about the aggregated effect of expedited license programs. So that is the legislative update.
Thank you. I'll look for any questions or comments from board members. Seeing none, do we have any in-person comments? Oh, I'm sorry. Is it Kelly or Abigail?
I'm somewhat disappointed that the governor vetoed the CARE legislation because, rural communities are going live with our care courts in January, and there is a distinct requirement. And when you couple that with another bill that kind of increases the clientele of LPS, the hit on rural communities as far as our licensees goes is very profound. So, it's unfortunate that happened. I'll leave it at that.
Abigail, did you?
I want to say I'm excited that the continuing education of menopausal mental course and maternal mental health, those bills were signed by the governor and that he's prioritizing women's health. And I'm excited to see what we create here for those 2 bills.
Thank you. The others? Do we have any in-person comments on this item?
Hello, Shanti Ezrin with CAMP. Just wanted to thank you, Roseanne, and the rest of your team for developing those 2 FAQs on SB 1024. Very helpful documents to understand the changes in the law and also when all those different pieces plus the one will take effect next year, January and in July. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other in-person comments, moderator, do we have any online comments?
We are open for public comment. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise your hand. We will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to continue with the agenda?
Yes, thank you. Okay, that concludes this item. We're going to go back to item 15, the Workforce Development Committee update. And Steve, that's you.
Hi there. A quick update on the Workforce Development Committee. We met last on October 11th, 2024, this year. We discussed, and actually we'll be hearing more discussion about this proposal later on at probably the next board meeting, I'm assuming. But we were talking about early eligibility for the clinical exam and the licensure process changes. And that's kind of looking at the pathway to licensure and seeing what we can do, change a little bit to make it easier for individuals to navigate that whole pathway. And we also talked about the alcohol and substance abuse coursework and possible trying to streamline that. So the whole intent is to, I think, make that coursework required before you actually get your registration. And because right now it's different requirements for different license types, so trying to streamline that. And lastly, we did work on the Workforce Development Action Plan. We identified some short-term and long-term goals and got some ideas for that. And so moving forward next year, the committee will be kind of looking at some of those actual goals and moving forward on those. It's a real brief update. So any questions?
Do we have any questions from our in-person? Oh, thank you. Seeing no questions in person, moderator, do we have any questions or comments online?
We are open for public comment on agenda item 15. Now is the time to raise your hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise your hand. And we will call on people in the order we have requests. And it looks like our first request is coming from Kimberly Miller. Hold on just a moment. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
Good morning, almost good afternoon to all of the board members and everyone there present. I just wanted to, I know something about the substance use disorder coursework. Like currently right now, I'm a social worker, but I'm working on my licensure there. But the substance use disorder coursework, I had wondered if there was going to be if people are getting a certification, if that's going to be counted. And that's my main thing because I'm taking a course to get certified in it. So would there be some provision for people like us in that particular case? Thank you.
I believe you say you're going through certification. As long we're just looking at the coursework contained in your actual degree program. So I'm not sure how to answer that question. Kimberly, I don't know if we can have an email address or if we can obtain that. Can you put it in the chat and then we can actually get in touch with you? Or you can actually, yeah, you can email me. If you can put my email address in the chat. Is that possible? Moderator? Okay. Kimberly, we'll get in touch with you.
And that was our only request for public comment via WebEx.
Thank you. Brain is slowing down. Thank you. On to item 23, update on board rulemaking proposals. And Christy, would you provide us with the overview?
Hello. Yes, let me pull that up here. All right, so we have quite a few regulation. I'm sorry? The mic is on. Should I get closer? There we go. All righty. So we have quite a few regulation proposals in the pipeline. There have been a lot of updates since this memo was created, so I will let you know about that. The disciplinary guidelines is in the initial review process. It's gone through the DCA Office of Legal Affairs and through the director, and now it's at agency. And once that process is complete, then we will be sending it out for public comment. And I'm expecting that we can do that in January. The unprofessional conduct regulation package has been approved and takes effect January 1st. The telehealth regulation, I have an update on that status as well. It is has actually already been noticed to the public. The public comment period started November 1st and ends on December 16th. The continuing education regulation proposal, that has actually now been submitted to DCA Legal Affairs to begin the initial review process. And the same for the advertising regulations. We have also submitted those documents to begin its initial process. So it'll be a busy year next year for regulations. And we'll, of course, the ESL regulations that you just approved, we're going to get that going really quickly as well. That's all I have.
Thank you. Any comments or questions from board members? Being none, do we have any comments from our in-person audience? Seeing none, moderator, do we have any comments online?
Now is the time to raise your hand for public comment on 23. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users, dial *3 to raise your hand. We will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to continue with the agenda?
Yes, thank you. We're on to item 24, suggestions for future agenda items. Are there any future agenda item suggestions from board members? Dr. Boyd.
Yes, I would like to, for us to consider two future agenda items. One of them is that currently the board does not specify educational courses required before practicum or internship field experience for counseling trainees in particular. And I think it's important for the board to specify specifically what courses need to be satisfied before trainees are entering their clinical experience. Currently, as it's written, it gives a unit number of hours, either semester or quarters, but it doesn't specify what courses exactly should be satisfied before they enter the field experience. I think, needless to say, that it's an important consumer protection issue if trainees are entering the clinical experience without having basic diagnostic classes or assessment courses or whatever important courses, but foundational counseling courses before they go to the field. That's the first one. The other one is that the board has assumed that universities in good faith are ensuring trainees are working across the entire mental health spectrum. That means diagnosing, treatment planning, providing direct psychotherapy, and also receiving supervision by a qualified licensed supervisor. However, if you look at the requirements as written, there's nothing specific in the current regulation or law that specifies what the credentials of the supervisor for trainees, counseling trainees in particular, so these are pre-graduated trainees, what those requirements are of those supervisors. Along with that, what are the types of expectations of supervision? As a result of that, there is, again, assumed that universities are providing the appropriate level of supervision, ensuring their field supervisors are meeting requirements, but I can tell you anecdotally that's not happening. And there's creating a bigger issue, which dovetails into the issue that was brought up during the Policy and Advocacy Committee about exploring the need to register trainees during their training experience. So all of these, I believe, go hand in hand together. And I think it should be an important priority of the board to establish regulations that make explicit the type of field experience required for trainees and who is considered an eligible supervisor.
Thank you. Any other suggestions for future agenda item?
We probably don't talk to that right now, correct?
What's that?
We don't talk to that currently. Okay.
Yeah, we can't speak to the issue until we agendize it. Okay. Kelly, did
Yes.
you have one? Okay, thank you.
I would like an update as to what statements BBS is going to make on the CWC supervision, if any. That's it.
Okay, great, thank you. Any others? Okay. Do we have any members of the audience in person that would like to suggest future agenda items? No? All right, seeing none, any members of our remote audience that would like to suggest future agenda items?
We are open for public comment via WebEx for future agenda items. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise a hand. We will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for future agenda items, do you wish to continue?
Yes, thank you. Next is item 25, public comments for items not on the agenda. We'll now open public comments for items not on the agenda. As a reminder, the board may not discuss or take action on any matter raised during this public comment section, except to decide whether to place the matter on the agenda of a future meeting. Each commenter will have 2 minutes. Do any board members have comments for items not on the agenda? Seeing none. Do we have any comments from those in the audience? Seeing none, moderator, do we have any comments for our remote participants for items not on the agenda?
We are open for public comment for items not on the agenda. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise a hand. We will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to continue?
Yes, thank you. That brings us to our last item of the day, adjournment. Thank you all for participating with us. Hope to see you all at our next board meeting on February 27th and 28th, 2025. The meeting is adjourned.